Broadcasting live on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and in the evenings on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. It is the Matt McNeil Show for your Monday. Good to be with you today. 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. Me and Patrick are here today. Also joining us is Aaron Rupar, the wildly popular reporter who covers Donald Trump far more than any human being should actually do. Public Notice is his fantastic blog over on Substack. You should subscribe. Aaron, by the way, I today became a founder, and I think everyone should go and do this too, because it's so much good information that you put out there. It is truly a great thing. So I want to encourage everyone to go subscribe and get into that founder level. So nicely done, sir.
Thank you, Matt. That's really, really nice. I was actually just on my bike, and I got the email that I had a new founding member.
Yes.
I did not, because I didn't want to crash, look to see who that was, but I guess that was you, so thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I am looking forward to being featured in the upcoming bathing suit edition, and I look forward to that. You, of course, and we are the only outlet that can call you Roops with the Scoops because you've been on with us for so many years. But you have done your due diligence. You've out there. You've watched all this, Trump over all these years. What a monumental, historical week last week with the guilty verdict. First of all, your thoughts overall on the trial and the verdict as it came down.
I got to say I was a little bit surprised that the verdict turned out as it did, and I think, part of that may have been that I got worked a little bit by the Trumpers because there was some reporting and some speculation. You heard a little bit of this like on Fox and Newsmax, that there was one juror in particular who the Trump camp thought was sympathetic to their point of view and might end up being the cause of a hung jury. And so I had that kind of in the back of my mind as they started deliberating. And on the other hand, you would hear Trump's lawyers on right-wing TV, and they would certainly be kind of bracing people for the worst, saying that, there's no way he could get a fair trial in New York, and that they had concerns about the jury and things like that. So it's one of those things, the way that our system works. By definition, you can't really predict how a jury is going to function or what the result is going to be because you don't know who is on the jury or what their background is, what their motivations are. All it would have taken, of course, is one diehard Trumper, to decide not to kind of look at the evidence, but to, basically engage in a form of jury nullification where maybe they thought that the trial was unfair to Trump in some way, and that could be enough to result in, an acquittal of sorts, or at least a hung jury. So I was a little bit surprised, and, I think we've seen by kind of the wailing and gnashing of teeth over the weekend and the hysteria that, this is something that the Trump camp is worried about, and there's been polling to this effect that it's usually between like 10 and 20% of Republicans, when this has been polled, have said that if Trump was convicted, they would not vote for him. I've always been a little bit skeptical of that polling. I think, we've seen time and time again that especially Republicans tend to circle the wagons and kind of get behind their person when it comes time to pull a lever in November. But, even if it ends up being 3 to 4% of Republicans who decide not to vote for Trump because of this, the way that our elections kind of shake out these days, that could be enough to swing the results. So, as you mentioned, it was a monumental week last week, and I think it was monumental in a negative way for Trump.
Jack Rice joined us and broke down the legal elements of it, and he said the reason why he's guilty is because the evidence against him was so overwhelming. I mean, it just really was. But yet, when you talked about the weekend, clearly the GOP sent out the memo that this has to be about anything other than Trump's guilt, the fact that he was, is paying off a porn star to try to help his presidential campaign in 2016. And it was remarkable to see the senior GOP officials across the board all run out there and scream at the top of their lungs, this was a Biden hit job with zero evidence of anything of it. But they have to convince their voters, as you brought up. It doesn't take a large percentage of his voters sitting at home and he's going to get trounced. So they've got to convince all the Republicans that, hey, this wasn't a legitimate verdict. This was Joe Biden somehow. And they're definitely, that's the narrative that's being pushed.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, a lot of these Republicans are so far down the path now with Trump that it's kind of impossible to take any sort of off-ramp that might be there. So I wasn't really surprised by that. I thought there was a telling moment this morning where Carolyn Leavitt, who was the Trump campaign press secretary, was on Fox Business and said something to the effect of, anybody who's calling Trump a convicted felon, what a shameful term that is, kind of trying to turn the tables that this is like a smear. when it's actually, obviously a factually correct and accurate description of him. And so, it's a tough predicament for them to be in. And I think the thing that I'm really interested in looking at here over the next week or two is when we start to get some credible polling that is post-conviction, what picture kind of emerges. Because if there is, the polling over the past couple months has shown kind of a slight move in Biden's direction, at least kind of pulling neck and neck, and maybe Trump was still ahead very slightly in the national polling, and ahead in some of these key swing states. But, if we do see, Biden pulling ahead and there being a real erosion for Trump, kind of how Republicans decide to spin that, because, obviously the sentencing is just a few days before the Republican National Convention, and there's already been talk, there's talk over the weekend on some of the Sunday shows where Republicans are racing that he might be on some sort of like home confinement, might have to do like a Zoom call to do his speech. It's going to get really weird, and I think it's going to get weird in ways that obviously don't reflect well on Trump. And so, I think it's hard for us to imagine people like you and I who are immersed in this every single day that there still is kind of a critical mass of voters who haven't really tuned in to politics yet this year and might not really have like a solid opinion on what they're going to be doing this November. But, I think as we see with Trump having sentencing coming up and, the fact that this is going to trail him over the next 5 months and it's going to be something that, will be a huge issue in the campaign, Republicans want people to believe that this is going to blow back on Biden somehow, that this is kind of evidence of like weaponized justice against Trump. But when you really kind of unpack that, there's no merit to it. And it just doesn't seem like it's going to do anything but hurt Trump heading into, a time when people are really locking in more in the campaign.
How about tomorrow? I mean, I believe our final bout of primaries is tomorrow, and Trump has been plagued throughout the entire primary season with around a 10 to 15%, erosion of his support, primarily behind Nikki Haley. Now she has thrown her support behind him. Tomorrow, if all of a sudden, there's I'm not sure what states are up, where he's on the ballot, but if all of a sudden we start seeing states once again where even with Nikki Haley endorsing him, he's still losing 10% of the Republican vote. Which would be almost a snap poll considering the verdict to this primary day tomorrow. I think that's a very telling sign of where he could be standing as well.
I think that's right. I think the thing that is important to keep in mind with conversations around kind of the weakness of Trump in some of these primaries is that there's been kind of a corresponding weakness with Biden, where there's been a lot of uncommitted voters and there's kind of a lack of enthusiasm on the far left for Biden. And so I think a big part of this campaign this year is going to be which of the two sides can kind of reunite their coalition, more effectively. Because I think, there's kind of, on both sides, I think you have kind of the more center Republicans who, might be turned off by some of the criminality of Trump. And then the Gaza policy of Biden seems to have hurt him, especially in places like Minnesota, obviously, on his far left flank. And so, I think that's been a big problem for Trump, but we really haven't seen it in the head-to-head polling with Biden because there's kind of a corresponding problem that he has. And so, I don't really have a sense at this point of who's going to be able to do a better job kind of reuniting that coalition. But when you look at this race and see that it's pretty much tied, I think that's a huge factor kind of hurting both candidates.
Do you, and just quickly on that note, when you see ever since Roe was overturned with the Dodd decision, we have seen basically an undercounting somewhere in the area of 7 to 15% towards the left in all these races. I was just looking at a story I'm going to talk about in a little bit. In South Dakota, the pro-abortion amendment is leading by 20 points in South Dakota. There has been a gross undercounting of outrage in this country since the overturning of abortion rights. Do you not think that that's prevalent in this presidential race?
I think that could be. I think, I've seen Nate Cohn at the New York Times kind of talk about this, how some of the dynamics that we've taken for granted in politics with, Republicans doing better on off-year elections and, and turnout was lower. It seems like there could be some confounding factors where in some of these off-year elections, because abortion has been such a salient issue, you've had huge Democratic turnout. And now, because while we're in a general election campaign, a presidential cycle where the turnout is higher, does that actually kind of help Republicans this year? Because we've already had kind of max Democratic turnout in 2022, 2023, and now Republicans, when Trump is on the ballot, come out in higher numbers to vote for him. So I just think it's hard to kind of like project into the future, especially since we haven't had a presidential cycle since Dobbs. But certainly I think, the one thing that I kind of caution progressives on a lot of the time is that when you look kind of issue by issue, there are a lot of issue sets where Trump actually, on policy, like for instance with immigration and the border, a lot of the draconian stuff that Trump wants to do actually polls quite well. And abortion is one where that is not the case, where obviously I think Democrats are playing a stronger hand. And we've seen that, as you mentioned, since June of 2022 when the Dobbs decision came down. The one thing that I would just say is that because Trump typically has driven Republican turnout to an extent as well, I wonder if, maybe abortion hasn't been as motivating for Republicans, and we've seen that in the midterms. We saw that in some of the 2023 elections. Now that Trump is back on the ballot, does that help him a little bit in a way that Democrats can't quite equal just because we've already had huge turnout for Dems in some of these off-cycle elections?
Aaron Rupar joining us once again. Public Notice is the blog over on Substack. Going back to Trump here, he's made now an open plea to the Supreme Court of the United States. Speaker Johnson says, they're my golf buddies, I'm paraphrasing, but they're my buddies. I'm making calls. The Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court weighs in on a New York State case, we're in real unexplored territory on the judicial side of things, aren't we?
Yeah, and that was actually the topic of today's newsletter. We kind of went in depth on this very issue, kind of unpacking what Mike Johnson said on Fox, that he's personal friends with some of the justices and knows that they share the concerns about Trump's conviction that he has. And we went through kind of what precedent indicates. And as you alluded to, state rulings typically are not reviewed by the Supreme Court, even when there are issues of federal law that pertain to the ruling, and it's called like the state grounds doctrine, where there's deference to state courts. But one of the points that Lisa Needham, who wrote the piece, made is that we've seen a real disregard for precedent from this court, and there's reason to suspect that if they felt like it was kind of an existential thing to help Trump, that they might consider, for instance, kind of subsuming this in the immunity conversation. That if Trump has presidential immunity, does that mean that he is immune from being convicted on even these state-level charges? That would be completely uncharted territory, but, it's hard to have total faith that the Supreme Court wouldn't do something like that. The point that Lisa made in the piece is that because this does not prevent Trump from running, this might be one of those instances, and we've seen a few of these, for instance, like with the Alabama gerrymandering case last spring, where a majority of the court actually took the more liberal position, where it seems like the Roberts Court does, with the exception maybe of like Alito and Thomas, does have some concern for maintaining at least a veneer of legitimacy. And would this be an instance where for them to meddle in it would be kind of even too far for them, that it might really undermine the court's power by making them appear illegitimate? So,
Aaron, I'll tell you what, Aaron, I got to step in here really quick. We got to take a break. Okay. Aaron Rupar joining us. It is the Matt McNeil Show on a Monday. It's the Matt McNeil Show on Monday, and Aaron Rupar joining us once again, 952-946-6205. And Aaron, you were talking about whether or not the Supreme Court would weigh in on this, but as you made the point, and you're talking about Roberts, who generally has been a little bit trying desperately to be even-keeled there. As long as he still can be on the ballot come November, is this something they really want to set a precedent for a Supreme Court to start stepping into state charges?
Yeah, I think not. Just to kind of make the point quickly on this one, I think that if they were to intervene, it would be within the context of the immunity conversation. Obviously, they're considering the immunity case right now in terms of, is Trump totally immune from committing crimes that happened when he was in office? If they were to review the conviction itself, they would have to wait until there's a ruling from New York's highest court, and that is going to take at least a year. So it's not anything that would happen between now and November. You've
been in a unique position. You have watched more Trump speeches and Trump rallies over the years than the vast majority of us. And I see a lot and hear a lot of people saying, oh, boy, Trump he's diminishing he's losing it mentally and all these things. And, there is a sensational nature of some of those stories, and I kind of put them aside. But I want to talk with you. You have watched him. If you were to describe, have you noticed a mental and physical health deterioration on the man, say, compared to what you were seeing 4 years ago?
Not really, to be honest with you. I think if you put it in the context of 8 years ago, I think there's more of a case, and I've made this point on Twitter with videos before, that if you watch a Trump speech from the summer of 2016, there was a certain energy to it. He was very lively. He was saying a lot of horrible stuff, but his delivery had a bit of quickness and almost like a comedic timing aspect to it that I think went away shortly after he took office. And I don't know if he was just kind of ground down by being president, the pressure of that office or what was going on. But certainly I noticed between 2016 and 2020, just an overall decline, which I think, you see this in fairness with President Biden as well. It's a very demanding job, even if you aren't doing it very well like Trump was. But it still takes a toll on you. And, I think if anything, being out of office has maybe reinvigorated him a little bit. I don't think he has quite as much trouble getting through speeches now as he did like in the fall of 2016. Of course, for part of that time he had COVID and was trying to battle through it when he was on the campaign trail. So it can be difficult to compare. But, I do get DMs all the time from people who attempt armchair diagnoses of Trump that he has dementia, specifically most of the time. And I just don't really think there's a lot of validity to that, at least from the standpoint that like someone like you or me can tell just watching him, not knowing him personally. And, he gets up there and he does these 2-hour rally speeches and they're unhinged and, he's angry a lot of the time. And they're not like masterful pieces of oratory, but, the fact that he's up there talking for 2 hours and people are hanging on his every word, I think kind of speaks for itself. So, no, I haven't noticed any sort of particular decline between 2020 and now.
I went back and I looked at, when I used to do Trump weeks when he was in office and, how he used we forget how many flubs he had on a daily basis back then. This is just who the guy is. I mean, he is, frankly, he's a television performer. He needs to have the teleprompter. He needs to have the camera and almost a direction sort of thing. And so when he goes off the fly, like a lot of those guys do, it's a much harder thing for him to do. He's always seemed to have problem with this. And I don't think the fact that him not having the polished environment around him that you usually see with the TV personality out there is necessarily equated to, a mental decline per se.
Yeah. And the other thing, for instance, yesterday morning, Trump was on Fox and Friends, and apparently they did an interview on Saturday with him, 3 of the different hosts, including Pete Hegseth, Minnesota's own. Yeah. But it was like a 90-minute interview, and, I noted this on Twitter that when you watched it, there were clearly some like very hard cuts where, they edited it down pretty dramatically. And then I think since then they've played like longer clips. They haven't played the whole thing, but they've played most of it. And, part of that is because, the $787 million settlements that Fox had with Dominion Voting Systems over the defamation case that, a lot of stuff that comes out of Trump's mouth is defamatory. And so, when you see Fox edited down, I had some people kind of, in my DMs wondering if this was to mask some sort of decline or that, he was incoherent, which obviously he was. But I think part of it, too, in instances like that is just to make sure that he's not saying things on their airwaves that could leave them holding a bag for hundreds of millions of dollars again, because it was only about a year ago that, they reached that settlement with Dominion. So there can be any number of reasons for things like that. It's not always that he has dementia. And I just think, again, you look at Obama over the 8 years he was in office, Biden over 4 years. Any of these presidents age and slow down. They're generally kind of older people anyway. I guess with the exception both of Clinton and Obama. But, both Biden and Trump were old men when they took office and are even older now. And it's just kind of, something that happens when you have a high-stress job into your 70s. You're not going to sound the same as you did 4 years earlier.
One final bit on the Trump, it's not going to be final. We're going to be talking about this for a while. But ProPublica just came out with a pretty exceptional research story, which says multiple people that were in the Trump witness camp that possibly on the stand for this trial received significant financial benefits from his businesses and or his campaign while they were, being called for the grand jury, as well as while they were on call to possibly be a witness in the case. Quite a bit. Salaries were doubled. Another employee got a $2 million severance package. Many of them apparently got Truth Social stock. It sounds like, obviously the question here is this witness tampering? They're saying that Trump had no say in it, but we just had a trial that said he has a lot of, he's like a lot of presidents. They basically got their tentacles in a lot of different places. I don't know how much you've seen on this, but that's a pretty big bombshell.
Yeah, actually, I have not seen that, so I'm going to check that out when we get off this call. But I will say, we had a newsletter item from a few months ago about how Trump's Truth Social page, I think the headline was something to the effect of, is a riot of witness intimidation, because that's what it was. It was Michael Cohen, even this, the witness that he liked, the Robert Costello, the former, who represented Michael Cohen as a lawyer at one point, kind of trying to portray him as extremely legitimate and then trash on Michael Cohen, who was obviously a witness, trashing on Stormy Daniels, who was a key witness, attacking the judge's family. So, it's kind of the story as old as time with Trump, where behavior that for any other politician would be a career ender is just kind of taken to be normal at a certain point because people get so worn down by it and, just becomes kind of a normal aspect of who this guy is. Even though, like, for instance, with Hunter Biden today having jury selection in his trial, if Joe Biden was on Twitter trashing witnesses in the trial, I mean, it would be the only thing that Fox and Newsmax would talk about for the next 6 months.
Exactly.
But for Trump, it's like kind of a report that, hardly anybody reads because it's so normal for him.
Yeah. By the way, just a side note, I love the pictures of the family. I'm so glad. I have no idea how you can do all the work you do and have kids, man. You are an outstanding individual. You're balancing all that together there. Public Notice is the Substack blog there, and a lot of great coverage, including what we talked about here, the Speaker Johnson's implications on getting the Supreme Court to step in the New York case. Go over there, become a member, subscribe to it, become a founder member over there, too. You get extra benefits with that, and help make sure Aaron Rupar stays in our presence as long as he possibly can. Aaron, thank you. You're outstanding as always, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. Hope to do it again soon.
Take care. Aaron Rupar, Public Notice, and, of course, on social media. We'll take a break. Come on back. It's the Matt McNeil Show on your Monday.